Hi, I'm Ruth Blackstock,
And I'm Mary Cousins.
And I'm Alex Livingston.
and together we are here today to tell you about counseling children of Hispanic and Latino immigrants. We're going to have an agenda, and we are going to talk about demographics, values and beliefs, characteristics of Hispanics. We're going to talk to you about issues revealed from a literature review. We're going to talk about recommended counseling theories. We are going to present a little bit of a cultural diversity plan, and we're going to talk to you about the lessons that we all have learned because we are all future school counselors, and this impacts us greatly here in Georgia. And then we'll give you a quick conclusion of where we think things could go from there. So stand by. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm back. I'm Ruth, if you remember. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the demographics of the culture that we're studying. In Hispanic demographics, Hispanics are the fastest growing minority in the U.S. In 2015, there were 55 million of them. By 2050, they're projected to be 100 million plus. Alex, please. There we go. The country of origin, the largest country of origin is Mexico. After that, you have about 9% from Central America, 9% from Puerto Rico, 9% from South America and the Caribbean, and then other cultures. Alex, please. There we go. As a generational status, 65% of the Hispanics in the U.S. today are U.S. born. That is, they are second generation. By 2050, it is projected that 70% will be U.S. born. So the immigration is slowing, and we're increasing Hispanics by the people who have been here. Alex, please. Finally, as far as racial identification, if you can see by the pictures down here, Hispanics are country-centric rather than pan-Hispanic. They also don't all identify as Hispanic on census data. They will be white, they might be black, they might be other. And you can see there is a wide variety of racial indications in Hispanics. So next, Alex, please, we're going to talk about the Hispanic values, beliefs, and characteristics. Now, these things vary according to the Hispanic's country of origin. They vary according to the generational status. In other words, are you straight off the boat? Are you second generation? Are you third or fourth generation? And they also vary by the amount that the Hispanic individual has assimilated to the U.S. mainstream culture. Alex, please. The first concept we're going to talk about is familismo, or family ties. The family network is a key support for Hispanic individuals. They really only seek help when the family network is exhausted, and that goes all the way through godparents. The family network is very much of a reciprocity. I help you, you help me. Familismo. Our next concept, Alex, please, is respeto, or respect. You must show respect to authority figures. If you as a child do not show respect, you can expect most likely some corporal punishment. This is a very key element, that there is a respect that goes up. And if we as counselors don't show respect, we're not going to get their trust. So very important concept. Our third concept, Alex, please, is personalismo. This is personal relationships. This is the trust because I know you as a person, not who you work for, you as an individual. If I have gotten to know you as a school counselor, as a lawyer, as a medical professional, and you no longer work for that institution, I might not come there anymore because my relationship and my trust was in you, not in the institution. So personalismo. Next, we have confianza, trust, and that goes with the personalismo. It's developed through respect and personal relationships, and this is a key for good counseling outcomes. To have the confianza the confidence of that individual. A couple other things to know about the Hispanic culture, Alex, please, is the concept of educación. Now, it's a cognate, but it doesn't mean education. It means upbringing. So, in the Hispanic mind, in the countries they come from, the moral upbringing is as important as the academic. If a student might not be performing as well on the academic, they might be considered to be okay by the family because they are showing the respect, they're deferring to authority, they are showing a moral education, and the academic can come later. So this educación is both moral and academic, and there's an expectation from the population that the teachers and the administrators at school will be an extension of that moral education. They get very confused, often with the first generation, when the schools start introducing sex education, when they do not think that that is appropriate at that age. So again, understanding this educación is very important. A couple more. We have machismo and marianismo. This is the gender role. The machismo is very much the breadwinner, the head of the family, the male who is not to be questioned. The marianismo, this comes from Maria, is this silent, suffering woman who nurtures and makes sure everything goes well, who is not as recognized in that society, but behind the scenes, very powerful individual. The final characteristic that we want to bring out is fatalismo, or fate. Ay, si Dios lo quiere, if God is willing, it will happen. Life is viewed as a series of things that happen to you that you don't have as much control over. Maybe this is part of the religious upbringing that they come from, and it could also be coming from the socioeconomic status, that they don't have a lot of power. So there's a little bit of, yeah, okay, it happens. Ay, pues, si Dios lo quiere, if God is willing. Okay, so that's pretty much of our beliefs, attitudes, characteristics. And next, we've got Mary coming to tell us about literature.
Hi, I'm Mary, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the issues that I came across through a review of literature discussing specifically the Hispanic and Latino population in terms of immigrants coming to this country. There are three major themes that ran through the review of literature that I wanted to bring up. The population, we've already discussed how fast it's growing. Ironically, there isn't a lot of research to help with evidence-based practices in the schools and even in counseling with this particular population. There are a few things that we'll touch on that we do know, but there's much more research that's needed. And in fact, when you compare the number of population that belongs to this category, this population of special population of people, it's really quite sad how little research there is to support mental health counselors that are trying to help those who are adjusting to life in this country. Three major themes, the first being the lack of assessment tools that are appropriate to use with this particular population. They are either culturally insensitive or they claim to be culture-free, which is not really, many people believe is not even something that exists. The second one is, of course, the importance of helping children develop a healthy ethnic identity so that they can go on to be contributing adults who are secure in their own self-awareness and self-esteem. And then how to help families, specifically for our group, navigate the school system, of which it can be quite scary for them. There are a lot of barriers to mental health for this particular population that are discussed, language, of course, being one of them. The multicultural inadequacies of counselors, just not understanding who they're dealing with. The stigma attached to mental health counseling is very profound in this particular population of people. It isn't very often that they're going to seek mental health counseling. They're going to go to their family. They're going to go to their extended family. In fact, the only mental health resources that may be available to them are the ones they're going to find in the school system where their children are being helped in some way with adjustment issues. There's also the fear of deportation and legal issues, which is very profound in many families. So to go outside of yourself is to go outside of your trust circle of people. The methods of assessment we talked about being inadequate. Most of them are measuring externalizing behaviors, and the externalizing behaviors are not normed to anyone other than middle class, white, very Eurocentric measures. So it makes it very difficult for you to find assessments that adequately measure for issues such as ADHD, psychopathology, even just behavioral problems or disorders. They don't show anything that would be defined as normal behavior for this particular population, which can be very different from what we consider to be normal population, a normal behavior for students who are in our middle-class white population. The instruments need to be appropriate in both content and construct. So it requires a much bigger picture when you're looking at evaluating these particular students and their families. Scales in particular we discussed for ADHD, hostility are inadequate. Psychopathy and behavioral problems, they just all of them consistently that were studied lacked cultural sensitivity to this particular group. And then there's the debate that we discussed about culture-free assessment tools that don't exist. Students, in order to develop a healthy ethnic identity, we have to challenge them to not only be able to function in the American mainstream culture, but to embrace their own culture. And that can be very difficult for children, especially when at home they are only exposed to maybe one language, one way of thinking, and then they come to school and there's a whole different way of thinking and having to learn English and communicate that way. They're often called upon to be the translators for their families. So it can be very difficult for them to find where they belong. Schools are predominantly geared to the white ethnocentric view of dealing with education and counseling students. So some of the very things that we have in place in our schools can be insulting, can be isolating, and can be very difficult for these families to navigate. Students can be experiencing stress from poverty, from loss of friends, from severing family ties when they relocated, from escaping political unrest, and the conflicting cultural attitudes of cooperation versus competition, which is a huge factor here in the United States. Everyone is out for themselves. That's not how this particular group of people, as a general rule, works. There is the language barrier, of course, and then the search for common peer groups. Especially when in your middle adolescence, common peer groups can be difficult when you're in a school that is 65% white, 28% African American, and there's a 3% Hispanic population. It's very difficult to find people to be in your own peer group. Helping students, they also need to deal with the frequent moves often for these families, and that every time you move, we find that there's a higher increase of withdrawal and isolation from their peers. So every move exacerbates that particular problem. The lack of positive role models, oftentimes they don't have people in their lives that they see in the school or career path that represents their culture, someone who's gone on to make something of themselves. So helping them with career counseling can be very, very difficult. Teachers and counselors are consistently ill prepared. They report on surveys. I don't feel like I was prepared to deal with this. So we have to come up with teacher training that has internships in these particular populations, required courses on cultural diversity, and seminars that help the counselors and teachers confront their own views on different populations, different ethnicities, and different cultures. And establishing positive relationships, which brings us to the final point of helping those families navigate the system. We all have to work together to look at our climate at our school and our particular culture. Does that bring them in? Does that get them involved? You have to make an effort to reach out to them, because oftentimes their lack of involvement does not have anything to do with love or care for their child. It has to do with the fact of them feeling inadequate or nervous about coming and being involved. What we can see as parents' role, they often see as the school's role, and they don't want to overstep their bounds. So you have to understand how to get them involved and how to help them, so that if their child expresses interest in going on to advanced education, that you can help the parents understand the value of it. School counselors sometimes can be the only advocate for these families. And as I said before, the only mental health counseling that these families can receive. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Alex. So I'm going to be discussing the counseling theory view. So the first theory that we discussed was the developmental systems theory. The first concept in this theory discusses the that throughout an adolescent's development, there is a connectedness that occurs between their biology, culture, and their history. The article that we looked over discussed that how the adjustment process or acculturation necessary for immigrant student is a prime example for the necessity of multi-level integration or development. So the family system is key to the acculturation process. Mental adjustment is also necessary and not always can happen immediately as the adolescent comes into the population. They have to adjust to their new counterparts. They might experience a sense of isolation or anxiety due to a change in environment. Acculturation not only affects the child physically by moving into a new environment, but also mentally and socially as well. The next concept is that development occurs throughout the entire lifespan. So the process of acculturation adapts to every area of the child's development and every phase of the child's development. Stresses arise from the acculturation process can be determined by the child's generational status. So for first generation children or students, they might not have the support of the parents because they do not understand the new country that they have come to. And that might put more stress on the child's acculturation process and might even cause the child to become a cultural broker with the parent. So this means that the parent might not know how to communicate through the new country's language. They might not have a lot of fun or have any social connections. And so the child ends up being the person who figures all this out for the family because the child is the one who's the most acclimated to the new environment. Another key concept is that highlighting the fact that immigrant children and students have a positive development process. So for adolescents, there tends to be a stress on the negative and the stresses of the adolescent development process. However, in this article, it discussed how there was a positive development for immigrant children coming to the new culture. It discussed that with their culture and their ethnic identity, they're able to thrive and stand out in their new culture instead of just feel isolated. There is positivity that goes on throughout this development process as well. So the last concept discussed the connectedness between biology and the context along the individual's life. It impacts the environment it lives in as the immigrant child comes into a new environment. It impacts that environment, and also the environment impacts them as well. So this means that the immigrant youth is making their new environment more culturally diverse by integrating their personal values, and also they're integrating the values that they're getting from this new culture as well. The school serves a key role in the acculturation process. It tends to be the main place where immigrant youth are able to dive into their new culture, and thus the school has a duty to help in that process and to decrease discrimination that can occur in the schools. And if they are able to do this, it can increase the success the student has in school and also their social progress and their mental health as well. So the other theory that we're going to discuss is filial theory, and it recognizes the emotional ties and family connectedness that occurs in a Hispanic culture. In this theory, they focus on the parent acting as the therapist, acting in the therapist role. So they understand that in the Hispanic culture, in the family, that they have a more emotional tie to each other than they will have to the actual therapist. And so they teach the parent how to be in the therapeutic role and help work out the child's emotions. They also incorporate Hispanic values. So we talked about those earlier. We talked about a few of those values. They incorporate some of those values into their therapeutic process. So the couple that I want to discuss are, first is Familissimo. And so they understand that the family is a key contributor to the Hispanic culture and to the identity of that Hispanic individual. And so they incorporate the family into the therapeutic process. They also incorporate respeto, which means that recognizing the hierarchy that occurs in a Hispanic culture, and they help the parent to not only maintain this hierarchy and this respect that they demand from their child, but also learn how to use the respect to garner better emotional ties with their child. And it helps the parent feel more in control, and also the parent to feel like they're a better parent in general. The last concept that they incorporate in filial therapy is personalissimo. And so this stresses that the therapist should open up to their client and become that person who the client trusts, and that this might be the only way that the client will seek out therapy and will continue to come to therapy. By doing this, they might show a concern for their loved ones. They might refer to them as senor or senora, just respecting their culture and showing that they truly care for them as a Hispanic individual.
The cultural diversity plan that we have in place is designed for grades 9 through 12. It can be modified for grades 6 through 8. It's designed as part of a 4-week unit. The classroom guidance can be used in both the English and the history, or one or the other. It is part of a comprehensive school counseling program that does follow the African National Model. And it can be used in regular classrooms, or it can be modified to use in ESOL or special ed classrooms if needed. There are 4 lessons designed to educate children about the specific immigrant population in their area. This would be on your yearly calendar, would be scheduled. I put it in there for November. It seems to be a good time to talk about diversity. Lesson 1 is about the myths of immigration, which is what I'll go into today. Lesson 2 is learning about my cultural self. Lesson 3 is pop culture and stereotypes, which I thought would be kind of fun with high schoolers to go through and look at how pop culture does subliminal advertising, and how our culture plays into what we see on TV, and how we form opinions about culture based on what we see in pop culture, as well as immigrants and human rights, which is the final one, which would tie in to a social studies history lesson. Our overall goal is for students to be able to break down myths. This is the one lesson that we're going to talk about today, about stereotypes and myths about immigration. They're the ASCA National, the standards for students that I've pulled in, that range anywhere from demonstrating cooperative behavior in groups to developing a respect and appreciation for individuals with cultural differences. The lessons themselves are going to last about 40 to 60 minutes long. Students are going to learn how stereotypes begin, why people perpetuate myths, and how they can break down myths and stereotypes. Classroom materials, just notebooks, paper for the kids to use, chart paper and markers, at least 6 different colors, and then there's a handout for this that's called The Truth About Immigration Myths. I would start this activity with a icebreaker. It's called Center Circle, and in the Center Circle we talk about pulling in groups of people who have similar characteristics. You start very benign with things like everybody's got on a blue shirt, everybody who has brown hair, and you start slowly but surely coming down to specific characteristics about different cultures that you may want to point out in your particular lesson, leads to this lesson. And you want to basically talk with the kids about how does it feel to be in the center of the circle? How does it feel to have other people who are like you in the center of the circle? What does it feel like when you're the only person in the center of the circle? So it's an activity that gets them thinking about differences without necessarily coming up and specifically mentioning diversity or the Hispanic population. The procedure for the actual lesson is starting with a pretest. The pretest would come actually at the beginning of the unit. The pretest is going to ask about questions about culture, how stereotypes begin, what are myths, so that they understand. Some kids may not understand what a myth is. Why do people perpetuate myths? How do myths and stereotypes get broken down? They will be divided into workstations. At each workstation, there's going to be 6 of them, 6 groups, 6 stations. There are going to be myths that are written down on a piece of paper. These myths can range anywhere from, people who immigrate to this country, the majority of them are here illegally. Most immigrants are here illegally. It's just as easy to enter the country legally as it is illegally. So there are 6 myths that we're going to have on these stations. And the kids are going to go to their stations, and what they're going to do is they're just going to talk about it. Is this true? Is it not true? They're going to write their thoughts down. Why would this not be true? What do you know that makes this not true? Then we're going to time it so they each get to go around and respond in different colors to what other people have written. So not only are they going to express their opinions, but they're going to learn what the other kids in the class had to say about these myths as well. So they'll go through their rotations. When they finish the rotations, we're going to talk about those myths. I'm going to read them the facts about this myth. Why is it not true? We're going to talk about the process of coming to this country and what it's like and why people would come here, how they physically get from one country to another and the process that they go through. Then we're going to talk about 4 other myths as a group to go over what they think about cultural diversity. These could be something as anyone who enters this country illegally is a criminal. That's a hot topic right now. There's a lot of things in the news about it. What do they know? What do they think? What are the facts? The United States is being overrun by immigrants like never before. Let's talk about the facts of that. Once we've discussed what the classes come up with in the last 4 myths, then we're going to ask some concluding questions of the kids that they're going to write down on the paper. We're going to talk about, okay, what have you learned about immigration? What have you learned about immigrants? What have you learned about people who are different from you? And then I'm going to ask them to think about who they can share these ideas with. Name one person that you think would want to hear about this. We also have social studies extensions and social studies and history extensions when we talk about the lesson on human rights. The evaluation methods would include things like pre-test, post-test questionnaires to the students, the parents, the teachers. We're going to be tracking behavior data during this time to see if it's affected at all by knowledge and facts about immigration, as well as evidence in the papers and the projects that the kids create. Are they communicating to me what I need to see that says, hey, I'm getting this, I'm hearing what you're saying? And then individual sessions with students. There will be both perception data and process data.
Hi, I hope you've enjoyed this. We have enjoyed doing all the research, and I hope you got something from what we presented to you. We definitely learned lessons. We learned as culturally competent counselors that our areas of knowledge are different from those of the Hispanic immigrant basis. We know how to work the system. We know how to push. We know that immigrants or first generation and second generation don't have those skills because they're not passed down generation to generation like we who have been in America for a long time have the advantage of doing. Our attitudes and beliefs are founded as individuals from African American white culture, from individualism. We refer to our nuclear family, but we still make our decisions as individuals. The Hispanic culture is a very referent group. They look at how this affects the group as a whole before they make a decision. And lastly, our skills. Again, we go back to that knowing how to work the system. We know how to be pushy. We know how to ask the questions. But in the Hispanic culture, and again, this is generalizing, but sometimes asking questions gets you deported or gets somebody that you know deported, or pushing too hard affects that legal status. And that becomes ingrained in the culture surrounding you to the point where you just accept what's going on. You don't push as hard. So lots of things learned about cross-cultural competencies, and we've also learned a lot about things that have counseling implications, that we need to know the demographic details of who we're dealing with. We need to know how those values and beliefs can be protective as well as harmful. We need to take into account the family network, the generational status of the individual, the country of origin, the immigration status. Are they legal or illegal? What are they surrounded by as a child in school, in our case? How much they adhere to the values and beliefs, and where the generational gaps, and the lack, how much knowledge they have, how much is ingrained, how much are they learning, how much do they still need to know. And we're going to keep knowing the studies that are put out there, because if we're not looking at those, we are not getting the latest and greatest, because as Mary said, there just are not enough studies done and enough evidence-based practices done with the Hispanic group. And finally, the biggest salient fact, I think, for all of us is that in the Hispanic group, the school counselor might be the only mental health counselor that any of the family or student comes in contact with, and that is a great, great responsibility.
So in conclusion, we know some statistics in the Hispanic population are improving. There is a decline in teen pregnancy, just like there is for other cultures. Not as much as in other race ethnic groups, but it's still declining. There is an increase in graduation rates, and this increase has been higher than even African American graduation rates. So that is good. Very encouraging. There is an increase in college attendance to both 2- and 4-year institutions, but it's mainly 2-year institution. They don't take on educational debt, and it has the lowest, Hispanics have the lowest 4-year degree attainment. So still there's that gap to understand that you need that 4 degree. You need to take on some debt maybe in order to succeed. There is less illegal immigration today, part of it because we're getting harsher on our deportation methods, our methods of finding illegal immigrants. But that also plays into the negative factors for this culture. The fear is greater. And finally, there is still an achievement gap between Hispanics and other cultures, especially white, to be closed. And all of these things that we've talked about are so important in helping that achievement gap to be closed. So on behalf of Alex, Mary, and myself, thank you so much for your attendance. And here I am again.